Welcome to Strange Dimensions. The interface to alternate realities. Contact experiences. And mysterious phenomena. And now your host for Strange Dimensions Radio. Here's Rosemary Ellen Guiley.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining me tonight. It's that time of the week to take another spin down the paranormal road. And I have a terrific show for you tonight on the evidence for the afterlife. This is one of my favorite topics, an area that I do a lot of research in, and we're going to be hearing from one of the most popular researchers in the field about what happens during dying, the final moments of death, and also about the many ways the dead come back to visit us and bring a lot of comfort and reassurance. And there are a whole lot of ramifications to this in terms of our beliefs about the afterlife and how we view ourselves as souls, the nature of our spirituality. We've got a lot of territory to cover. But first, I want to give you some news of what's going on in my paranormal world. And I'm so excited. I announced this last week, and I've got more information for you this week. So excited about this cruise coming up in November 8th through 13th. It's a Caribbean cruise called the Mysteries Cruise. And I'm going to be joining Micah Hanks, another host here on KGRA, and paranormal podcaster Jim Harold for a super paranormal sailing trip going down to Turks and Caicos, then to the Dominican Republic, all on a gorgeous princess ship. And what I want to announce tonight is here's a special to really sweeten the deal. Between now and May 2nd, you can reserve your cabin for only $50 down, and you get a coupon book worth about $500, plus you get an autographed copy of one of my books. And now here's how you do it. You go to mysteriescruise.com, register, and be sure to put in the promo code RGMay, M-A-Y. That'll seal the deal for you. So I look forward to seeing you and get a head start on the fall holidays. That's going to be a great trip. What else is coming up? On the first weekend in May, you're going to find me at the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Camping Adventure. That's down in Benner's Meadow Run Campgrounds in Farmington, Pennsylvania. I'm going to be presenting on interdimensional Sasquatch, all the evidence for Bigfoot being a resident of a parallel dimension to Earth. This is a second annual charity event organized by Eric Altman, who's a very good friend of mine and one of the leading cryptid researchers in the field. I've been out doing nighttime vigils with Eric. Haven't seen a Sasquatch yet, but I keep hoping, and maybe that'll happen this weekend because we'll be doing day hikes and night hikes. We'll have a barbecue, lots of fun, as well as some fascinating talks. Might be your chance to actually have a Sasquatch encounter because we'll be down in one of the hottest zones in the state of Pennsylvania for that kind of activity. One final thing, yesterday my house was turned into a filming studio, working on a documentary on shadow people and the jinn, and boy did we have poltergeist activity in the house, because it seems that every time you talk about the jinn, and the shadow people are a form taken by jinn, things start kicking up. They take a notice and they let themselves be known. We even had a coin apport, which is something they seem to do. They like to leave small change to let you know they've been around. Looking forward to that coming out in another few months. And speaking of filming, and this gets back to my guest tonight, it wasn't long ago when part of a pilot project for a series on afterlife communications and experiences was filmed at my house. And that's what brought me together with my amazing guest tonight, Josie Varga. That project is based on her experiences and work as one of the leading afterlife researchers. We talked about dream visits from the dead, and Josie and I made an instant connection, and I felt like I had known her for a very long time. Josie is the best-selling author of several books on visits and communications from the dead, Visits from Heaven, Visits to Heaven, and Divine Visits. She has a hugely popular Facebook page called Visits to Heaven. I urge you to check it out. It's got more than 30,000 followers, and lots of interesting discussions go on there. She is a former magazine editor and communications consultant. And like a lot of people in these fields, the paranormal, metaphysics, afterlife studies, it's an experience that really gets you going on more research. And that's what happened to Josie. So like a lot of other people in these fields, her life literally changed course when she had a visitation dream, a validated dream message from a man who had died in the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center in 2001. Someone she had never met, but she knew who he was, and she became the messenger to give a message to his family. That forever transformed her life, and Josie embarked on a spiritual journey as she really vowed to help other people understand that life truly never ends and love never dies. Life, she says, is eternal, and so are we. Tonight, Josie Varga is here to talk about her newest book, A Call from Heaven, Deathbed Visits, Angelic Visions, and Crossings to the Other Side. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Josie back to Strange Dimensions. Her website is josievarga.com. Josie, thanks for joining me again on the show.
Oh, you're welcome, my beautiful friend. How are you?
Well, like you, I've been busy working on all kinds of book projects. Just put the finishing touches on a book of strange paranormal travel tales that will be out. Also revised my own book on afterlife communications, Dream Messages from the Afterlife, Visits from the Dead. And you're featured in that book.
Yes.
And your work has been quite an inspiration to me. All of the topics that you've covered. And you're busy promoting that new book now, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. And by the way, you don't know how much it means to me to hear you say that. I'm thrilled to have your support. And like you were saying before, when I met you, there was an instant connection. So I know there's a reason that you and I met.
Well, indeed, our work and our experiences take us down strange roads sometimes, but you have meetings with people that you just know that something significant has taken place by coming together with someone, and that your paths are going to cross again and again in meaningful ways. I think there's a lot of past life connection that goes on in these kinds of experiences. So I'll bet you and I had some shared common ground along these lines in the past.
I'm sure we have. And really, that's honestly how I've been doing all of my books. I've been following my heart, following my intuition. I don't know if you remember in the book, in A Call from Heaven, I explained why I decided to write a book on deathbed phenomena. I had been thinking about doing it, Rosemary. I was in the process of writing Divine Visits, which was about angelic and divine encounters. And I had gone to my primary care physician for a physical. And I walk in, and he and I always have, interesting conversations. And he looked at me and he asked me, he said, Josie, are you working on any more books? And I said, yeah, Dr. Toro. I said, I'm working on a book called Divine Visits. I said, you'd be surprised. I said, I was just talking to a doctor, and he said these experiences are happening more and more. And he surprised me, Rosemary, because he looked at me and he said, oh, yes, I know. He said, I just had an experience this week. So I looked at him and I said, well, what happened? And he proceeded to tell me that he had a patient at his hospital, and he said they couldn't do anything more for her. So he said he went into her room to tell her that they were going to transfer her to another facility. He walks into her room, and she has family and friends there, so there were a bunch of witnesses to this event. And he goes up to her and he says he's going to transfer her to a different hospital, and she looks at him and she says, no. And he says, what do you mean? And she says, well, she proceeded to tell him that her grandson, who was killed in the Iraq War, was in the room with her, and it was her time. So they're all watching her, and she's having this conversation with her grandson, who no one else in the room can see. But he was telling me that he was like looking over his shoulder, She's looking over his shoulder, having this conversation. And I interrupted him and I said, do you think that it was the result of hallucinations? And he looked at me and he said, Josie, absolutely not. He said she was completely coherent. He said, so coherent, in fact, that she joked with her best friend who was in the room. She told her best friend, hey, just because I'm gone doesn't mean that you can date my husband. Okay? And he said that with a chuckle. So he said that she was completely coherent. And then all of a sudden she said, okay, I'm ready. And he said within minutes, she passed away. So he told me that story, and I had a conversation with him, and I explained that it was called a deathbed visit and what they were. And when I left his office, I decided that that was the next book I had to write. So, like I said, with every single book I've written really about the spiritual, I've had something happen to me that told me I needed to write that book.
And that's often the way it is. There's an experience that just really lights the fire. Now, this phenomenon called deathbed visions, that's been documented for a long time.
It's been documented for a long time, yeah. In fact, I think it was in the 60s and 70s, Osis and Harrison, they did a study in the United States and India, and they found out that about 50% of people have these phenomena. But what I say often, now that study says 50%. Then there was another study in Buffalo, New York recently, and they put the number up between 50 and 60%. When I read another study, Rosemary, the number said 77%. So what does that tell you? That tells you that we cannot have an exact number. And that's okay, because I don't think that the number is really important. What's important here is that they are actually happening. There's a quote by William James that I love, and I mention it all the time, and I mention it in the book. He says, to upset the conclusion that all crows are black, there is no need to seek demonstration that no crows are black. It is sufficient to produce one white crow. A single one is sufficient. So, in other words, numbers are not important. If you find one validated, one real experience, then that's okay. And believe me, I found, and you've been doing this a long time, everywhere I go, when people hear about what I do, people stop me to tell me about their experience. And I have to laugh because it's often preceded with, you're going to think I'm crazy, but, and I always look at them and say, no, I'm not going to think you're crazy. Go ahead and tell me what happened. So this book was really, I don't know, it's really amazing to actually write this. I learned a lot, and one of the highlights for me was interviewing Dr. Bruce Grayson over at the University of Virginia. He wrote a paper about what he terms peak Endowment experiences, and I absolutely loved writing about this. And what this basically means, it means that those that are dying and on their deathbed mention people in the room. They mention the presence of a deceased person in the room of whose death they had no knowledge, okay? So to me, that was really amazing. When I read his paper, I decided to do more research about it, and there was one story that he mentioned that really, it made the hairs stand up on my arms. He told a story about a little boy named Eddie Cuomo, and Eddie Cuomo had a very high fever and went into a coma. So he comes out of the coma, and he tells his mother and father who are in the room, he says, he went to heaven. And he spoke of all the people that he saw. He says, Mom and Dad, I saw Grandpa, I saw Rosa, I saw Uncle Lorenzo. And then all of a sudden he shocks his mother and father by saying, and I also saw Teresa. Now, Teresa was his 19-year-old sister who was away at college.
So she was alive at that point.
Yes. So his father obviously gets really upset and says, what are you talking about? I just spoke to Teresa 2 days ago. She's fine. She's away at college. And her son says, no, Dad, I saw her. And she told me that it wasn't my time. She told me that I had to go back. So To make a long story short, the father goes home, and there's a message from the college. His daughter had in fact been killed in a car accident just after midnight, but no one was aware of it. So again, how do you explain something like that other than to say that he actually did see his deceased sister?
So many of the dying have these experiences where they see deceased friends and family members, and as you point out, some of them, they don't know that those there might be some individuals who have died. They don't know that they've actually died, and skeptics have a very hard time explaining away something like that. We can't pass this off as wish fulfillment or hallucinations or oxygen deprivation. How would we know? And you mentioned this term peak and Darien experiences, and I found these cases very interesting myself. And some folks out there might not know exactly what those are, and that actually refers to a 19th century book by the same name about a phenomenon. And can you explain a little of what that phenomenon is?
Yeah, it's the title was taken from a book by a woman named Frances Cove, and the book was written in 1882, and she takes the title from a poem written by John Keats. And John Keats had wrote a poem about, he describes the surprise of the Spaniards who, after reaching a peak in Darien, which is now in Panama, they expect to see land, but instead, Rosemary, they see another ocean, okay? So when she read that poem by John Keats, it reminded her of these cases where people who were on their deathbed were mentioning other people in the room that they did not know were deceased. And there are tons of these stories. Dr. Penny Sartori is in the book. She's done a lot of research on near-death experiences, and she's a former nurse, and I was so grateful to have her in the book. And she talks about one patient of hers, and I asked her, I said, what was the one case that really stands out in your mind? And she told me the case of this man who, he wasn't doing well. He was dying, and his family was there. But then he got better. And they said, okay, they were going to come back in the morning. So they left. And she said during the night, they could hear him having conversations. Well, the following morning, his family comes back, and he explained that he was having conversations with his mother and his grandmother, but he said he was confused because he also saw his sister. Well, what's ironic about that is his sister had passed away a week prior, but they didn't tell him because they didn't want to hinder his recovery. So they never told him that his sister passed away. So again, how do you explain something like that? And you're right, skeptics can't easily explain this away. I love it when I ask this question. Like you mentioned before when you were introducing me about my husband's friend and how I had the dream about him and how he died in the World Trade Center attack. Well, the amazing thing about that, and the reason I wrote Visits from Heaven the way that I did, Visits from Heaven, the first book is about evidential afterlife communication. In the dream, Rich says to me, Josie, Boston is okay. And when he said that, Rosemary, I had no idea whatsoever what Boston is okay meant. However, I understood that this was a message intuitively. I knew instantly. This is a message that he wants me to get to his wife. And to make a very long story short, when we finally got the message to his family, we found out, now remember, never met him, never met his family, never met anyone. We found out that his wife had a brother in Boston. She still does, but she has a brother in Boston. She was considering selling her home and moving to Boston. But she felt guilty because she purchased a house before her husband died. So when I got that validation, I said to myself, oh my God. So that makes perfect sense. So he was saying Boston is okay. It's okay with me. You can move to Boston. And I can't tell you how many times I've said that to people and they'll say, oh, no, well, it can't be. And I'll say, okay, well, then what's your explanation for it? And they don't have an answer. And I recently wrote a blog this week, and what I said was, for those of us that have had such experiences, no proof is necessary. But for those of us who haven't, maybe no proof will ever be enough. I don't know. But I think these, people love books like this because they get to read about all these experiences that other people have, and they know that they're not alone.
A lot of research on people who've served as proxies, that the dead come and visit them with a message for someone else. And there seems to be something about the mechanism of dreaming that we might not understand, or why they can't get through to a primary person, but we can often serve as messengers. And it's very important to pay attention to these dreams.
But I think of it differently. I think that, like in my case, when I first had that experience, I'm thinking to myself, okay, why did this happen? And why did he come to me? Why didn't he go to his wife? Okay. But I call them third-party signs, because think about it. If he had gone directly to his wife, here she is, grieving. Here she is, feeling guilty about the prospect of moving. So had he gone to her, had he given her the exact same message, Rosemary, had he said, okay, Boston is okay, she might have second-guessed it and said, oh, okay, that's just wishful thinking. I'm feeling guilty, so maybe that's why I had the dream. But now he comes to me, a third party, with no knowledge whatsoever, and it's so much more validating. His wife knows that it has to be her husband. And dreams are a primary way that these deathbed visits occur, by the way. For instance, I talk about in the book, so many times when people are on their deathbed and they die, okay, people are awoken at the exact same moment that their friends and relatives pass away. Like I talk about this one story in the book where this woman's mother died. Well, she sees her mother in a dream, and her mother is saying to her, she's saying goodbye to her mother in the dream, and her mother saying goodbye to her. And at that moment, she's awoken by the phone, and it was the hospital telling her that her mother had just passed away. So it was she had the dream, and then the phone call validating that her mother passed away. So, and this is, like you said before, this has happened many times, more times than we can count.
Why do you think dreams are the most common way that the dead come to visit us?
I think it's the easiest way that they, think about it. When we dream, we're kind of in between dimensions, our barriers are down. It's the easiest way for them to communicate with us. It took me a long time to realize when I had my experience that I actually had an out-of-body experience. Like, I kept saying to myself, God, it was so weird. It was so vivid. It was so vivid. I felt myself moving. I felt like I was actually partaking in the dream. And when I realized, oh my God, I actually had an out-of-body experience, which explained, I say all the time, when I came back at the very end, he kind of pushed me forward. And when he did that, I woke up in a sitting position, panting and out of breath. I mean, literally, Rosemary, I felt like something hit me in my chest. And I didn't realize until much later that I actually had an out-of-body experience. So I think it's the easiest way for those on the other side to communicate with us. Think about it. How many times do we, and it does happen, how many times do we see apparitions of our loved ones? That happens too. But many times, I had one woman tell me that she saw her mother and she screamed and told her mother to go away. Okay? So she saw her mother and she screamed and told her mother to go away. And she said afterwards, she said, oh my God, I shouldn't have done that. But she said it was fear that made her do that. But when you're dreaming, all those fears, all those guards are down. You don't have to worry about any of that. Does that make sense?
It does, and we are in an alternate reality during the dream state where
Right.
a lot of things that wouldn't seem possible in waking reality suddenly are possible and make complete sense to us in the dream state. Josie, we're just coming up on our break this evening. We're going to take a short few minutes out. Folks, do stay with us, because when we come back, the question I have for Josie is there really an angel of death? I want to find out about that, because she's written about that in A Call from Heaven. You're listening to Strange Dimensions on KGRAradio.com. We'll be right back in just a few minutes.
Are you feeling stuck? Is there a cloud hanging over you? Are you trying to find your purpose? Are you holding on to negative energies or beliefs? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, maybe you're ready to invite light and love into your life. Visit onlinevibes.com and shop the items you'll need to bring healthy and healing vibes into your space, including smudging tools and incense, aromatherapy, crystals, divination tools, candles, natural body care products, jewelry, and lots of thoughtful gift ideas from and for the heart. Visit onlinevibes.com. That's online, VIBEZ.com for your mind, body, and spirit needs, and get your vibes on today.
The healing powers of silver, Ion Silver, an antiseptic powerhouse used for centuries. Now you can harness the benefits of Ion Silver in a convenient spray. Ion Silver is a highly effective antimicrobial spray that's safe for family and pets. Excellent for wound care, a must for your first aid kit. It binds to bacteria, viruses, and fungus to immediately destroy them. Also used as an underarm deodorant, acne preventative, surface disinfectant, and more. Buy Ion Silver at ionsilver.us. That's ionsilver.us.
You've probably heard about all the great benefits of goat milk soap. But did you know some companies take shortcuts? At Old New England Soap, we make our organic goat's milk soap using 36% goat's milk. That's 17% more than most others. Our bars are larger, so they last longer, producing lots of lather packed with vitamins. And our soap is a natural moisturizer that smooths dry and damaged skin. Order online at oldnesoap.com. That's oldnesoap.com. You've tried the rest. Now try the best. oldnesoap.com.
Water-based soaps on supermarket shelves use harsh chemical acids to break down dead skin cells. And that's just not good for you. At Old New England Soap, our soaps are made without chemical ingredients, contain no alcohol or petroleum products, and use 85% organic materials and carry the USDA's organic certification. Try some today. Go to oldnesoap.com. That's oldnesoap.com. oldnesoap.com.
Your official contact for the best alternative talk on the planet. KGRAradio.com.
And we're back this evening with my fantastic guest, Josie Varga, one of the leading researchers on afterlife communications and studies, visits from the dead, previews of heaven, deathbed visions. We're talking about her new book tonight, A Call from Heaven, personal accounts of deathbed visits, angelic visions, and crossings to the other side. Josie, just before the break, my question to you is there really an angel of death?
Yes, there is. And it's funny, some people call it the angel of death. Some people don't refer to it like that. They think it's a negative term. But there was one story where this nurse is on the night shift, and she's just going down the hospital corridor, passing the rooms, right? And on her way back to the nurse's station, she's like looking into every room as she passes by. And as she goes past this one room, she sees a dark, human-shaped figure at the foot of the bed, okay? You know, like she just walks by, she sees this dark figure, and it didn't hit her at first. And then she goes back to look again and doesn't see this figure anymore. But what was surprising is she was so unnerved by it that she goes back to the nurse's station. And there was an LPN there and another nurse called Darlene, I think her name was. And she says, you know, my God, I think I just saw a dark figure, you know, in that room over there. And this one nurse says to her, oh, that's just the angel of death. You know, we see it all the time. That's just the angel of death. And the nurse whose patient that was went running to the room at that point to check on the patient, okay? And then the next day, that patient died. So in this particular hospital, they see this all the time, and they refer to it as the angel of death.
Go ahead, Josie.
But sometimes it's not, I want to say one thing, it's more common for people to be met by those that they know. It's the most common to be met by relatives, you know, friends and family members, rather than figures that they don't recognize or, you know, dark figures or anything like that. But you know, it does happen. You know, people see dark figures and people also see white figures. I know you have come across that in your own search, in your own research.
I have, and frequently in hospital settings, and these figures are visible to the staff. And sometimes it's not clear whether or not the patient is aware of them. The patient may be having encounters with their deceased family and friends, but these angel of death figures seem to be harbingers or announcers. In other words, when it's your time to go, it's your time to go. And I recall one story that I read from a nurse. Now, she saw a figure of light, and it was where the figure was standing that told her whether the patient was going to survive or die. And no matter what the doctor said, no matter what the prognosis was, no matter what condition the patient was in, and if the figure was at the head of the bed, the patient would recover. And if the figure was at the foot of the bed, the patient would die. And so here you've got another case where an angel of death figure is seen at the foot of the bed. And isn't it interesting that when we have bedroom visits from the dead, they often appear at the foot of the bed? There's something significant about that.
Absolutely. And did you know, I had people ask me, have you ever seen spirit? And I have. I saw my godmother. I was at her funeral, and I looked over, Rosemary, and I saw my godmother standing at the foot of her coffin. And I remember having a conversation with a medium friend of mine, and he said something that shocked me. He said, oh, well, you know that when spirits, when they come to their funerals, they often stand at the foot of the coffin. So it's ironic, the foot of the coffin, the foot of the bed, you know. But I actually saw my godmother. She wasn't, I could see her full form, she wasn't solid in any way, but I could clearly see that it was my godmother. And I always thought, it's funny, I think I've told you this once before, people laugh at me because even though I've been researching the afterlife for over 10 years, I am afraid of ghosts.
That doesn't compute.
Yeah, like for me, there's a big difference between seeing the spirit of someone I don't know, okay, and getting a message from my loved one. So when I saw my godmother, I always wondered, by the way, how would I react if I actually saw a spirit, with my own eyes in the daytime and whatever. And when I saw my godmother, a complete peace came over me, because she was my godmother. And by the way, it was right before I went up to say her eulogy. She always said to me, when I die, I want you to say my eulogy. So I wrote something special for her, and I was getting ready to go up there, and I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to do this, because she was a second mother to me. I took it really hard. My knees buckled. I cried in my husband's arms. I didn't think that I was going to have the strength to go up there. And all of a sudden, I heard her voice say, don't cry, Josie. And I look over, and she actually called me Joe. She said, don't cry, Joe. And I look over, and I see my godmother at the foot of the coffin. And then I got the strength to go up there and do the eulogy. But when I looked back, I didn't see her anymore, but I knew she was there. And, I want to mention one thing. You were talking about nurses and experiences that you've heard with nurses. There's a website called allnurses.com, and it's like a forum, kind of like a Facebook for nurses, where you can go on there and share your experiences. So when I was doing my research, I wanted to join and get a sense of, how many were having these deathbed experiences. And, oh, my God. It was amazing how many of these nurses reported having these deathbed phenomena. And people can go on to that website and look it up themselves. I wrote a chapter about it for A Call from Heaven, and the editor decided to take it out of the book because she felt that I had enough stories from doctors and nurses, and she didn't think that the book needed it, okay? But there was one story that I absolutely loved, and I wanted to have it in the book. It was there was one particular patient, okay, that was always pressing and hitting the call button. He drove the nurses absolutely insane, where they would take turns going to the room and answering, and checking on him because it was just crazy. So as the story goes, he died at about 8 p.m., right? So the nurses call his family, the funeral home comes, they take the body. So now it's 10 p.m., so it's 2 hours later. He dies around 8 p.m. Now it's 10 p.m., okay? They're sitting at the nurse's station. There's nobody in his room now. His body's gone. There's nobody there. All of a sudden, his call button starts going off, okay? Every 5 minutes, Rosemary, his call button starts going off. And what they said was, this went on for 4 hours straight. 4 hours straight, and there was nobody in the room, okay? So after 4 hours, this one nurse is very aggravated and upset, and what they said was that she was she believed in spiritual phenomena, and she goes into the room, and she yells, enough. She says, you died. Now go into the light and be happy, okay? And he said, I kid you not, from that moment on, the call button stopped going off.
Oh, that's an amazing story.
I absolutely love, I just told you that story, right? And I got goosebumps telling that story. Think about it. Because the guy always pressed the call button. He always drove the nurses nuts, okay? He dies at 8 o'clock. His body's gone. There's nobody in the room. And at 10 p.m., 2 hours later, the call button starts going off about every 5 minutes for 4 straight hours, right? Driving everybody crazy. And then the nurse goes in there, yells at him to stop it and go into the light. And then all of a sudden, it stops.
I guess he wanted to let them know that he was still around in one form or another. Maybe not in the physical, but he was still around, Life continues on.
I guess he didn't want to stop pressing that call button.
These deathbed visions that people have, and they occur to people who are in the process of dying, either from complications of illness or age.
Mm-hmm.
What about people who die suddenly, like in an accident? Are they escorted to heaven as well? Do they ever come back and say that they had some transition visions of the afterlife or the dead?
Yes, they do. You know what they say, that we are never, ever alone. We're never alone in life, and we're never alone in death. You know, what people say, because think about it, okay? Those on the other side, they know what's going to happen beforehand. And on a spiritual level, you and I know it. On a spiritual level, you and I know when we're going to die. You know what I mean? A lot of times, like a week before we die, we start saying things. Like my grandmother, for instance, okay? My grandmother, I wrote this story in the book. My grandmother had a heart attack, Rosemary. Otherwise, she was always pretty healthy. And she thought she had the flu. You know, her symptoms were pretty much like the flu. And we go over to her house, and she refused to go to the hospital. And that night, she got worse and worse, and the next day she passed away. But what my mother told me 2 days later, she said, you know, your grandmother told me that your grandfather was in the room. And I said, really? And at the time, this was a long time ago. I was in high school at the time. So if you would have, in college at the time, I think I was a sophomore in college. So if you would have said to me then, you know, this was deathbed phenomena, these were deathbed visits, and that I would someday write about the afterlife, I would have said, yeah, right, you're crazy. You know, that's never going to happen. But my grandmother mentioned the presence of my grandfather, told my mother that he was in the room. She said he's standing right over there. And my mother and my father and, you know, other people that were in the room, nobody could see my grandfather. But what I found interesting about that is that my cousin told me a little while later, she said that my grandmother told her 2 weeks prior that my grandfather had come to her. So again, you know, they on the other side know when we're going to die. So, you know, you say, how about people who die suddenly? Well, it's not suddenly to those on the other side, because they know it's going to happen. And there's always somebody there to escort us to the other side.
So we do have the way prepared for us, making this transition into the afterlife. What else do people see in these visions besides visitations from their loved ones?
They see angels. It's common to see angelic figures. It's common to see, you know, maybe Jesus, Mary. And sometimes, like I was saying to you during the break, sometimes they see people that they don't recognize. And that's not very common, but it does happen. Sometimes I see people that they don't recognize. And there's one story that sticks out in my mind. There was one woman who kept telling the nurses and the doctors that there was a little girl in a white dress in her room. And they didn't think, you know, anything of it. But the woman ended up passing away that night. And the next day, the nurse goes to the daughter and tells her that the mother kept saying that there was a little girl, you know, dressed in white in her room. And the girl shocked the woman by saying that this was something very common in the family, that others who had died in the family mentioned seeing a little girl in white, you know, on their deathbed. So people, you know, don't necessarily only see deceased loved ones, although that is the most common. That is the most common. And besides that, besides seeing deceased loved ones, there are other things that they see. They see portals, Rosemary. There's one story in the book where this girl is in the room with her father, and he described seeing the sky, okay? He's looking up at the ceiling of the hospital room, and they see nothing but the ceiling, you know. They see nothing but a white ceiling. And the father saying, no, can't you see that? You know, I can see a beautiful white sky. So, you know, she didn't think too much of it. But what's interesting about this case is about 2 days later, on the day that he actually died, he kept reaching forward to go with someone, which is another common thing. Many people who are on their deathbed reach forward as if to go with someone. So her sister had passed away before the father. I think it was about 5 or 6 months before the father, okay? And as she's standing there, the father had calmed down, and they're like waiting for him to die, pretty much. And all of a sudden, she says, the room filled up with this white light. She said it was beautiful, and it filled her with, a sense of peace and comfort. And all of a sudden, she said, she heard her sister's voice say, "Don't worry, heaven is beautiful." Okay, heaven is beautiful. And shortly after that, her father passed away. Now, I love that story. I think that's just incredible.
It's a beautiful story. Do witnesses, the people who are in attendance to the dying, do they ever see any of these visions, or do they see the soul leave the body?
Yes. That's a very common thing. There's a nurse that I interviewed, and she described it, Rosemary, almost like, she said it was almost like a silver mist, And what's interesting is a lot of people will say they see a white mist. Other people say they see a silver mist. I don't, maybe there's some significance in the color. I don't know. But yes, that's a very common thing. They see atmospheric changes in the room. They see the temperature might drop in the room, and what I mentioned before, the white light, the mist. There's also what I call synchronicity. I talk about 7 different types of deathbed phenomena. 1 is visual. 2 is gateway. Like I said before, a gateway, where a guy sees the sky, where a portal opens up, that would be considered a gateway visit. Atmospheric, temperature changes, mist, synchronicity. And what I mean by that, there's one interesting story. I think it was mentioned by Peter Fenwick. Dr. Peter Fenwick wrote a wonderful book called The Art of Dying, and I'm so grateful that he wrote the foreword to my book. But this woman passes away, and every single clock in her house is stuck on the time that she died.
I've heard similar stories. Yes, about clock stopping.
Yeah, but every single one, not just one. Okay, not just one, every single one.
That's unusual. That's unusual.
Yep, every single one. And then the other one is dreams. Many times what happens is our deceased loved ones will come to us in the dream to say goodbye. Like I said before, that's the easiest point of contact. So many times they come to us in a dream to say goodbye. Another type is auditory. Sometimes the reason that I didn't really, like some people call these deathbed visions, and I didn't want to call it deathbed visions for the simple reason is not all deathbed phenomena are visual, For instance, there was a woman who said that she could hear music, that her aunt was saying that she heard the angels singing, that she could actually hear music. So sometimes it's auditory and not visual. And the last one, like in the case of Picandarian experience, is shared deathbed phenomena. These are quite amazing, if you ask me. There's a story in the book. The woman's name is Annie Kopp, and she's all the way in the UK, and her mother's here in the US, okay? And on the day that her mother passed away, she's with a client here, Rosemary, and suddenly feels really sick. She said she felt like she, had to cough something up in her throat. She just was so sick and couldn't figure out what was going on. And she said she had the urge to get on the phone and call her sister, who was with her mother here in the States in the hospital. So the client that she was with leaves. She calls, and when she called her sister, she heard her mother making the sounds that she herself was just making, okay? And she realized that, oh my God, I'm actually sharing in my mother's death. She was having some of the same symptoms that her mother had. So that can happen as well. And what I said before about the woman who saw the white light in the room, you know, she wasn't the only one who saw that. There were other people in the room who saw that. And also people who see deceased loved ones. There are people who also see deceased loved ones, you know, people who see angelic figures, you know, not just the person who is dying, but other people in the room. And that is, to me, the most validating.
You make the observation in the book that when people are in attendance and witness these things, they feel a transformation from being religious into spiritual. They say they feel that they're a lot more spiritual and not necessarily quite as religious as they were. What are the implications for religion as more and more of these experiences come into public awareness and are discussed, and more people are having them?
More people are having them, and not only are more people having them, I think the issue here is more people are coming forward with them. And that's why I think books like these and, you know, groups like Visits from Heaven that I have on Facebook are so important. You know, people are realizing that it's okay. It's okay. You know, they're not crazy. It's okay to share the experience. People are just real. You know, what does it tell you? All right. When you think about it, you think about all these phenomena, not just deathbed phenomena, but near-death experiences, afterlife communication, okay? What does it say? It says that we are far more than the physical body. We have to be. If we weren't more than the physical body, none of these phenomena would be able to take place. You know, like Edgar Cayce said, we are spiritual beings having a human experience, not the other way around. And the other thing, which I bring out in the book, we talk about the issue of consciousness, which is a big debate today, okay? I had the pleasure of having Evan Alexander in the book. And Evan Alexander, as you know, was a neurosurgeon who had a near-death experience. So here he's taught about, you know, he's taught all these things about consciousness, but then he has this experience, and he says nowadays, when he's asked about consciousness, he will admit that he had it all wrong. Okay, he would admit that he had it all wrong. He says that the brain doesn't generate consciousness, but rather acts as a filter. He said consciousness actually creates physical reality. So that's another thing. When you think about this, what does it say about the nature of reality? You know, what does it say about consciousness and who we are and our reason for being here? You know, the idea that God or a spiritual being or whatever, you know, a supreme being, whatever you want to call it, the idea that we were put here just to die doesn't make any sense.
This research, it really illuminates the meaning of life, the meaning of existence, when we start to contemplate what the afterlife is like, that there is an afterlife. Josie, we're coming up in the closing minutes of our show. Your website, josievarga.com, that's where people can go to find out about you and your events and books. What have you got coming up?
I have another interview tomorrow, Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. People can find out about that on my website. I have a book signing at Barnes & Noble in Clark, New Jersey, coming up on Sunday, May 7th at 2 p.m. So if anybody's in the area, come down. I'd love to meet you.
One of the things that you also say in your book that really struck a chord with me, and I'm going to read the sentence that you've got in the book here. I think this is something that people really need to hear. The nature of reality will continue to be masked with the mysterious, and science will continue to fall short until researchers study the unseen. How very well put.
Yeah, you know, if you think about it, really, skeptics claim that, you know, can't be real because it can't be tested in a laboratory. However, everything that we see, Rosemary, everything that we see, the earth, the suns, the stars, the trees, everything, okay, makes up 5% of the mass of the universe. The rest is composed of dark matter and dark energy. So, most of the universe is composed of matter that we cannot observe. However, we know it's there, right? We know it's there because of its gravitational effects. So truly, I think the more we study the unseen, the more we will understand the physical. And by the way, that's something that you've heard of Nikola Tesla. That's something that he always used to say. He said that if we study the unseen in one decade, we will make more progress than all the centuries combined before. If we study the unseen. I think he said the day science begins to study the non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in one decade than in all our previous centuries in existence. That's pretty amazing, and it's true.
It's very true, and Josie, that's a great sentiment to end the show on. We've come to the end of our time tonight. Josie Varga, I want to thank you for being with me and shedding so much light on such an important topic.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. We'll definitely have you back again. You've been listening, folks, to Strange Dimensions Radio on KGRAradio.com, and don't touch that knob, so to speak, on the internet, because Fade to Black with Jimmy Church is coming up in just a few minutes. Meanwhile, we'll have another great show for you next week, and see you on down that paranormal road.